and now, ever and always, I choose my path. I am the arbiter of my destiny. I am born of what was, I am built from what came before, but I am not ruled by it. I am the one who decides. I am the one who rules in the present. I am the one who chooses the weight and measure of my past. I am the one whose direction lies forward. I am the one who gains the skills I need to be and do what I choose to be and do. I am the one who decides what is important to me. I claim my birthright as a magician. I claim my birthright as an avatar of the ineffable. I choose the road I walk, and I walk it in full knowledge that I have chosen it. I walk it knowing that I alone can walk it, and that I alone can choose another path. I take full and complete responsibility for my actions from this moment forward. Here and now, ever and always, I choose my path. That's from Aidan Wachter's book, 6 Ways. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. It's a podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin language, and also discuss a variety of occult topics. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you are hearing this, then this show, and magic for that matter, is for you, if you want it. There are lots of different ways to be more free, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself, and others can, will, and should disagree sometimes. How would we ever learn anything if we all agreed all the time, after all? And like anybody should be, I am willing to revise my opinions based on new evidence. Alright, so I am super stoked for today's guest, Aidan Wachter. He's an author, a talismanic jeweler, a podcaster, magician, general cool person, I don't know. So in this interview, I mentioned Aidan's work in the same sentence as Condensed Chaos by Phil Hine, which I did sort of intentionally. I think I would recommend 6 Ways right alongside Condensed Chaos, which is pretty high praise coming from me. It's really info-dense, plainly stated practical information that passes the fucking smell test. I recommend it and Weaving Fate very highly. It can be super challenging to explain a lot of this stuff to people, I'm learning. And Aidan does a killer job of nailing down some very complex concepts in language that is straightforward and free of any, I don't know, perhaps we could say shadow magician, smoke and mirrors bullshit. There's a ton of stuff like that out there, so just saying. But one of the ways that I sort of connected with Aidan's work too is that we both had been sort of influenced by reading Carlos Castaneda, who, well, he was definitely not a good anthropologist, and there are several other nasty rumors about him that I won't go into, but reading his shit at a sort of like critical period in my development certainly had a big impact on me and my practice and how I like do magic and see shit. I've seen some of the things that Castaneda talks about, so I don't know. Anyway, I have a copy of Castaneda's book Journey to Ixtlan, which has been with me since I was like, I don't know, 15 or some shit. I don't open it much, but for this episode, I asked it if it would help give us a little taste of Castaneda's work. So here's what the book had to share with us. Did you see the bridge, Don Juan? No. I just saw power. It may have been anything. Power for you, this time, was a bridge. I don't know why a bridge. We are most mysterious creatures. Have you ever seen a bridge in the fog, Don Juan? Never. But that's because I'm not like you. I saw other things. My battles of power are very different than yours. So yes, I like that. You know, each of us is an individual. We all have our own battles of power to face to get where we need to go. Aidan's work, there's a lot of shit about how to do that in there, which I think is really fucking dope. So just real quick, because I want to get to this interview, I do want to say thank you so much for listening to my show. It's been incredible for like hearing from so many amazing people about like what they're up to magically, and now with the Green Mushroom Project, which is super fucking exciting to hear about all this stuff. The Green Mushroom Project is a large-scale group working that you can be a part of if you want to. I'll talk a little bit more about it after the interview. So there's also been a bit of a shift in what the analytics are telling me about who's listening to the show. And if the info I'm getting is correct, Welcome, ladies. I'm so glad you're here with us. Hell yeah. Also, thank you so much to the international listeners. Podcasting is kind of like the dream of pirate radio realized on like a massive scale in some ways. So that's kind of fucking cool. I don't know. Fuck yeah. I think that this idea sort of fits well with the theme of today's show. So I think there's a ton of good advice in this one. So definitely listen close because this dude knows what he's talking about. Here is my interview with Aidan Wachter. I'm just going to say that I'm super stoked today to be talking to my guest, who is author, magician, talismanic jeweler, general all-purpose badass, Aidan Wachter.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I wanted to just say, like, right out of the gate here that I really appreciate your, I don't know, unpretentious approach. I was reading Six Ways. This was pretty, like, early on in the book, but you have a little note where you explicitly say that you're using Wikipedia as a reference just to offend the snobs. It's like, fuck yeah.
That is, yeah. I'm glad. There's people who definitely would like me to be more academic, I know, and I'm just not. It's not who I am, and so I don't pretend. So
I think that's okay. And I mean, even the people that, I don't know, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to say that I love the approach. All the shit with Z-Cluster and shit too. Like, I don't know. I think it's good to keep this shit out in the open and not fucking be all gatekeepery about it, right? That's completely counter to what it's all about. I don't know. Magic is natural, right? It belongs to everybody, and like fuck the people who want to tell you that they somehow have like exclusive access to it because of like X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm like totally with you. I think like if you're part of an actual initiatory tradition that is required to work with that stuff, I totally respect that. That's logical, right? But the general thing of, ooh, I have learned the secret to superpower. And it's like, well, great. Even if you've learned a secret to superpower for you.
Yeah, or like you don't understand magic if you haven't read this certain book, or like...
Yeah, it's all whack.
All right. Well, okay. So we've talked a little bit on this show before about like hypersigils and shit. We talked about Grant Morrison and all that stuff. And in that episode, we definitely talked about your book, Weaving Fate. So I'm wondering, like, when did you first kind of start playing around with hypersigils as a tool?
Really in the 90s. I had not... It's funny. I'm sure that I heard the term because I read at least the first couple of years of Invisibles as they were coming out. But I had totally no clue about that term until my friend Fabiku brought it up. And I was like, tell me more about this. And he explained it. It's like, oh yeah, I do a version of this thing, which is what I talk about in Weaving Fate. But somewhere in the 90s, I started messing around with this idea that magic was basically about, in some fashion, speaking or acting out things that were not true in the present moment, but that would cause them to become true over time. And so I guess that's really the root of the whole idea to me.
Yeah, that actually makes total sense. Like, that's kind of some of the, I don't know, maybe theory behind ritual. Behind ritual too.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if we think about the stuff that gets labeled as primitive religion, right? You go, yeah, you act out this hunt as if it's successful so that you have a successful hunt, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the root process of most magic of a practical nature. You know, there's definitely a whole lot of magic that to me appears much more religious in function. But I think that, yeah, for practical magic, that's really it. It's kind of metaphorical means to real world ends, right?
Yeah, definitely. Now, when you say religious in purpose, like, are you talking about like in terms of like socially binding people together? Or?
Both socially binding people together, or just the idea of kind of external deity as something that we're trying that humans can connect to for some, I'm just going to say non-practical, which is really bad languaging, but it's what I got right now, and we'll correct as we go. End, right? So I think if you're praying to a deity to change something or to bring something to you, you're practicing practical magic within a religious context. But there's a lot of, I mean, if you, this is so far outside of what I read anymore, but when I was early on studying magic, a lot of stuff was like, this is tools for like union with the Godhead or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which was never really what I was into. And it's never personally made sense to me. And it's not in any way that I have a problem with it, right? It's just not my world. Mm-hmm. I get periodically hate mail from people who think that that's what I'm saying, is that this is not a worthwhile process or something. And it's not that. It's just that it's one that's never called to me. It has never really made sense to me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, everybody's going to contextualize things differently. And yeah. So, okay, your book, Weaving Fate, Hypersigils, Changing the Past, and Telling True Lies. It's super dope. You all should read it. I'm wondering, is it itself, could you consider it sort of a hypersigil intended to spawn more hypersigils? I'm tempted to call it like a meta-sigil or something. I was
going to say, that's like a super meta-analysis. I don't think I thought of it that way when I was working on it, but I can see how that is an aspect of it, which ties into really all of the work that I've done publicly since about 2012, when I kind of, I was very public early on, and then got quiet for about 10 years. And then I guess it was around 2012, I kind of resurfaced with the jewelry stuff and the talismanic work. And that's been a constant theme in all the stuff that I've done that's gone public, is that it's about forming connections between the people using the tools and kind of the allies in the field. And this is not specific to my allies, but also to connect people together. And so this was very much a case with the talismanic jewelry. At one point, when I was making pieces for St. Cyprian, Jason Miller actually totally pegged that, without me ever saying anything about it in public at that time, and said, I want one of these pieces, though I don't know if I'm ever going to wear it, but I feel like it's a really good way to connect to other, Cyprianic practitioners. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, that's what he says about it. So, that seems to be legit, at least as far as Mr. Cyprian thinks. And so I think that the books are like that too, in a way, right? That they allow folks that are kind of on a similar train of thought or practice to end up perhaps creating something that is more meta about it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I think you talk a little bit about like this experiential approach, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think you do a good job of illustrating, or maybe it's X that does a good job of illustrating mm-hmm. in the book, like how it's this kind of like, I don't know, I want to say like qualia, or like just like the language of the mind, these like these experiences that are really important. Like this experiential quality is like so important to creating a good black book entry. The black book is the hypersigil technique that Aidan talks about in Weaving Fate.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the key to most magic that I've found is, right, if we think about what we do with ritual, or whether even things that, like, I don't do well with drumming, but I know a lot of people who do well with kind of drumming as trance induction or ritual induction, or we do these kind of immersive processes, whatever they are, for magic. I think that that's what we're actually doing, is we're tapping into that experiential level, allows us to connect on some level that's way beyond what our intellect really is probably comfortable with doing. And so it's mostly about finding different ways to do that. But within the Black Book work, yeah, that's the huge thing. That's kind of the interesting aspect out of it is, as I get contacts from people or communications from people, the folks that really want to brain it real hard and like, okay, I'm going to plan this whole thing out and I'm going to lay out the entries, they don't get very far until they let go of that. And then they go, okay, I've been doing this for months. I've been, using, kind of taking a very hard intellectual, linear or more programmed approach to it. Like, I want this to happen, and then I want this to happen, and I want this to happen exactly like that. And then at some point, if they kind of cave and really kind of fall into that pure experience of what they're writing and what they're doing, That's when they go, oh, okay, so why does all this other stuff that seems like it should work not work? But if I can really feel something just intensely, it does. And so I think to me, that's kind of the key that I got out of, I think I got that out of kind of IoT style, massive chaos B kind of possession work. Is probably the first place that I really got that in a kind of consistent way. It's like, okay, if I can get far enough out of the way and really be just in I don't even know, I want to say like tangible or palpable world of magic where my brain is not the driver. It's involved in the process, obviously, and the mind is clearly kind of pointing me in a particular direction. But if I can kind of go and get really loose and focus on, that what I talk about is the feeling sense. What would it feel like to have the things that you want, and that's the key to getting them for me.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, the language that we use, all of it, it's maps that we put on the mental territory, if you will, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just so that we can communicate with each other. So getting rid of those like extra layers of like whatever dross or whatever you want to call it to get to the actual thing that you really want, which is the experience. I think that's super key.
Yeah, and I think that's I bring it up a lot in that in the Welcome to Malkuth podcast with Graves Meredith on Glitch Bottle. She says some brilliant stuff at the end where she says, rather than trying to figure out, what books you need to buy to practice magic, first, like, what does it feel like to you? What comes to your mind or your senses when you think about magic? Because that's probably a really good place to start, right? Because you've already got that connection. And it's interesting. I see this a lot in, it's kind of an unpopular take, but you see it a lot in folks that came to witchcraft through the craft, right? A lot of those people, I think, that I know were super successful because they had this whole vibe that they were able to tap into because they had the whole kind of sensory experience of seeing that, usually as young people.
Okay, yeah. I'm actually thinking about Cthulhu. I think for some people, Cthulhu is like that.
Totally. And so it's very interesting because you take something that's immersive, like stuff from film or novelizations, not the stuff that necessarily just looks good, but the stuff that for whatever reason just really hit you. I think of like the work of Charles DeLint or Terry Windling's The Woodwife or other great examples of that you can really, they kind of suck you into this whole vibe that I think it's pretty easy to pull from that connection, go, okay, what can I do that would feel like that for me? It's not about the specific words or the specific actions or the specific symbols, the specific beings that you're dealing with or anything like that necessarily, but what would it really feel like? Like if I was just to start with, what does it feel like? And so I think that I'm heavily influenced by the fact that the earliest thing that I probably read that made any kind of sense on that level is Castaneda. And there's a level that description to my like 11 or 12-year-old mind or whatever totally clicked. And so I have to kind of constantly credit that. It's like, even though we know that he was, writing fiction, I don't think that that's the relevant piece there.
Yeah, for sure.
He was tapped into something that's then allowed a lot of people to tap into something very similar.
Yeah, definitely. It's so funny. Like, I actually read a lot of Castaneda when I was in high school, right around the time when I discovered the joys of hallucinogenic drugs. I feel like I took a lot away from it, even though we know that he probably wasn't maybe the best. But
exactly.
I don't know. So neither was Crowley, and people still fucking love him. So I don't know.
Absolutely, and I think it's a really tricky one, right? And it's funny. So like when I was talking to, I'm trying to think of who I was talking to recently. Oh, I think it was Dara Mason Field, who runs the Spirit Box podcast. And he and I connected on the fact that we really just didn't ever really gel with Crowley, right? And it's like, okay, well, that's maybe not it's just the not appropriate image set or the feeling set. Because that was my issue with him. Is it's not that I don't think that the guy was smart or deserves a lot of credit for kind of pushing the things into the modern world the same way that I feel about Gardner, though they're not things that I really think of as particularly influential on me in a direct fashion, But they did make that connection for a ton of people that then kind of snapped something into place for whoever was reading it, so that they could then feel that thing that they needed to feel to do the work.
Yeah, definitely.
For me, obviously, that was Spare. Like, I saw Spare's shit and was like, oh yeah, fuck Crowley.
Yeah.
This guy's insane. I don't understand a word he says, but his fucking art is so badass that
my God.
it's pure magic,
Yeah.
And so to me, he was kind of he was my first kind of line in, was like, I don't know what that guy's about, because you really couldn't get his books anywhere at the time that I found him in the US. So I had like this multi-generation Xerox of Images and Oracles by Kenneth Grant. So I had these really like hard to see pictures and hard to read words that were like way out of context. It was like, yeah, this guy to me feels right.
I'm not quite sure why, but you can see there's something fucking going on.
Yeah, it's like, this guy has got it. I don't know what it is, but he's got it. And by kind of copying that aesthetic to some degree, I realized worked for me. So I had, previously had kind of things that looked more like Wicca at the time, 80s Wicca or 80s Golden Dawn stuff. And when I saw some of Spare's stuff, there's a frontispiece from the Book of Pleasure where he's at this desk covered with crazy homunculi and skulls and things. And I was like, oh, that's what an altar is supposed to look like. And that's what my altar has looked like basically ever since. And it works for me, because it connects me to that sense that is, I think I think it's a natural connection to magic, that just happens to be part of the aesthetic that works to trigger it for me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, I feel like that's so much of it, right? Like, our visual like cues, like symbology and shit, like it's kind of universal language, but everybody's gonna have like their own shit that clicks with them. And I feel like that's totally what all of these different things are. Like, it's kind of like, I know people get mad at me sometimes when I say that it's all sort of the same shit underneath all of it. It's just like different aesthetics and whatever. I don't know. Mm-hmm. We can argue about this later, people online, but I really do think it's important to just, like you said, trust yourself to fucking be like, oh yeah, that's the, and like, you don't have to fucking worry about why or whatever. Like, if that's what it is, that's what it is.
Exactly. And so it doesn't matter whether you're talking, people that are like really not popular in the mainstream stuff of somebody like, what's his name? E.A. Kotang, or, Michael Ford's weird ass take on chaos magic, all that stuff. Sure, if that's what gets you going, that's great. Just understand that that's a door in, just like my stuff or Crowley is a door in. There's a bunch of people that are going to tell you have to do all this stuff exactly as it's written, and I'm not that guy. If you've got a door in, that's all you really need, I think. Because again, I think it's natural. I don't think this is some special fucking skill set that only the elite get to have access to.
Yeah, totally. I super agree. And like, I don't even know if you can, like, you can write all the fucking fancy instructions you want in a book, but you're not really going to be able to like fucking teach somebody how to actually do magic, because, well, like you said, we already fucking sort of know. And the only way to actually like understand it is to do it anyway. So it's like,
it was really funny. There was a point where I was in the IoT for a while in I guess it was early 90s. And the temple that I was a part of in San Francisco was really way open. So the guy whose thing it was, he was a chaos magician, but he was also heavily versed in conjure and hoodoo, and worked at a candle shop doing that stuff. And there's a wide range of people, and we both had open classes for the members, but we also did taught on chaos magic and things like that. And the most fascinating things for me was like, who would just really fly with one piece of something. So I know there was one person who I taught sigil magic in like less than 5 minutes at the kitchen table, because that was the only day they were going to be in our part of California. And I talked to them a couple of years ago, and they're like, no, I've completely redesigned my entire life based on that 5 minutes.
Holy shit.
And I think that's all I needed. I haven't really looked at another book. I haven't dug on it, but everything I do is based on that. So you go like, how much do you need to know if that's worked for somebody for 30 years or almost 30 years, right?
Yeah. No, I think I heard you talking about this. Maybe it's cool and it's fun. I think it's fun if that's like what's interesting to you, to like learn all this different shit, then hell yeah, do it. But like, you don't need to do it, right? Like, just do what works.
Yeah, it's like, it's interesting. I don't know if you've looked at any of the Black Book material out of Sweden, the Scandinavian grimoire stuff, you know. There's a guy that I knew for a long, long time. I met him, I think it's more than 30 years ago now. Tom Johnson has a book that I am not going to be able to say what it's called, but it's some really long Swedish title. And it is available through Revelor Press, and it's his doctoral dissertation about the Swedish Black Books. And one of the things that's really cool is that each of these individual little grimoires is super basic. This is not any massive list of spirits or anything. These are like, you know, how to hex somebody's shotgun and how to lame somebody's horse and all this stuff. But there's a lot of similarity between a lot of them, but the basic practices within them are really small. And with the availability of so much information now, I think it's just kind of a given that this idea that you need more information. And, you know, my take is always like, no, you probably need more practice. You need more hands-on. Like, find something that you go, I like that. I like how it feels. I like how it looks. I like the idea of it. And just get really fucking good at that. To me, that's the way in for most people that aren't interested in this that aren't necessarily interested in as occultism as a study, right? Mm-hmm. But who are interested in practical magic. Because I mean, if you know how to do a couple of things, you're more than capable of completely redesigning your life and getting into and out of all sorts of trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah, just real quick, what you were saying earlier about the Xerox copy that you had of Kenneth Grant's shit. Like, I was thinking about how much we fucking take for granted these days.
Oh man, that took me ages to find. It took me ages. It took me, I think, 4 years to find a copy of SSO TBME by Ramsey Dukes. I think I actively looked for that book for 4 years.
A fucking classic. Everybody should read it.
It took me longer than that to find the Book of Results by Ray Sherwin. Yeah, that there was very little what I think of as practical magic. There was a few things on kind of hoodoo and conjure type stuff. There were a few kind of anthropological books on voodoo. And then you had a lot of Golden Dawn, a lot of Crowley, and a lot of Wicca.
Do you think the increase in like access to all this stuff has helped or been, I guess it's probably a double-edged sword, but do you think it's been more of a good thing, or is it just added to the argumentation?
I think that there's people, again, I have this distinction that I tend to make, and I don't mean it as an offensive thing. It's just a good way to think of it, to me, is realizing that there is that practical magic and occultism are two very different things. It doesn't mean that there's not a lot of crossovers, or that you can't do both. But you absolutely do not need to be in occultism to practice kind of functional basic magic, or even really crazy advanced magic. If all you had access to was enough information to learn how to do Enochian magic, pretty much everyone would agree that that's an advanced format of magic. But if that's a good system, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, because it's not something I practice, why do you also need to know all these other things? Unless that's your interest, is just studying those things or learning about them. So I think it's a weird one. I think that it's good that there's so many different kind of doors that are available to people now. But the idea that you need to learn all this stuff, it's like people are reading way more magic than they would to in basically any subject to earn a doctorate as kind of common practice or expected practice. And to me, that's not what I'm particularly into. I would much rather have people going, okay, my interest is in practical magic, so I'm going to learn a way to do candle spells and maybe a little bit of energy work and energy work practice, and the 90 seconds it takes for them to learn how to do a spiritual cleansing bath for if they get in trouble. And you're good to go as far as I'm concerned. And if you play with those things long enough, they can teach you whatever else you need to know.
I think I'm actually just now getting why everybody's so gatekeepery and snobby. It's because they're fucking reading too much and they want to justify it.
Well, I mean, it's really interesting. It is, and it's selection bias and confirmation bias are very important things, I think, and it's important to understand that in magic as anywhere else, right?
Definitely.
And so the example that I use is, it's like, I've been, training with weights and calisthenics and stuff like that for 30 years now, or 20 years now. And almost everybody that I know that works out is in way better shape than I am, right? I don't have the genetics to do that look, right, that everybody is after, and I started way too late to get there. But that doesn't mean that I don't get all the benefit out of it, right? I'm not as strong. I'm not all ripped, right? But I'm way healthier and I'm way stronger than I would be otherwise, right? So it's it's a funny thing, because then you go, okay, so if I have a degree that cost me whatever, and I've got $50,000 worth of student loan debt on it, right, to get me where I am, do I want to tell somebody that they can get to the same place for free and without doing that 7 years of work? That's not a common thing. There are people who do that, but that's not the common thing. We generally want to kind of defend our positions, right?
Yeah, you might not even want to admit to yourself that it's possible to do that. I don't know.
You know, and so it's funny. And I think, again, it's like the people that I know who, and this was true early on, that the people that I knew who I thought were better magicians, this is purely judgment call, right? Mm-hmm. We're doing really simple stuff a lot. And we're like, oh yeah, like 6 years into this practice that I'm doing, or this way of doing candle magic, I'm still learning. But I'm not learning from books, right? This is nobody ever said I'm learning from books how to be a better candle magician.
I've never heard anybody say that.
Yeah, I'm not learning from books how to be a better sigil magician, right? It's like you learn it from picking up a piece of paper and going, okay, what if I do it this way? What if I phrase it this way? What if I put myself in this kind of a state of mind before I begin? If I really look at things in an honest fashion and I'm not trying to be comforting to myself, what kind of work do I do that works the best, regardless of what I think should work the best? Like, those are all really brilliant questions to me. And if you have any kind of a basic practice and ask those questions, what always goes off? What do I ask for that never works? Mm-hmm. Is that a question of what I'm asking for? Is it a question for how I'm asking? Is it how I feel about that inside? Do I need to do some psychological work to realize why I have blocks against that? I think that those things are all huge. And so, yeah, I do think that the availability of tons of information and the people who love that, it's really easy for them to go, everybody else needs to do the same work that I do, not taking into account that maybe they don't love that thing, you know?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It kind of reminds me of this idea of, I know you talk about this a lot, like this steering the ship, like you know where you want to go.
Yeah.
You know what you're trying to do, but you might need to make constant course corrections. I feel like Phil Hine talks about like constantly needing to be deprogramming yourself and condensed chaos. I feel like it's kind of in the same vein, right? There's always going to be all this bullshit coming at you and circumstances or whatever. So it's not about like making these, like snapping your finger and busting off a couple sigils and like fixing everything. Like, it's a practice.
Yeah. And it's also like, it's a practice that's set up on the ground, right? And I think that happens on the ground, meaning that it happens as we're walking it, right? And I've done a lot of, I was a distance runner for a long time when I lived in the higher mountains than I am now. And it was a lot like that. Like, you would go, okay, I'm going up to that mountain, right? You could see it. Strap on your water and throw some food in a camelback or whatever and go, I'm going up there. But that's really all you get to know unless you really want to try and like just strictly follow all of the set paths, right? And to me, that's a beautiful thing, right? Because you go, okay, it's. I think the analogy that I use a lot is like, if I'm here in New Mexico and I want to go to New York, all I really need to know is that it's east to start, and I can adjust the course constantly to get there. And I probably should if I'm not in some kind of crazy hurry, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Because then I get to see all this cool shit that I wouldn't see otherwise. And if I decided to do that on a bicycle or something, or walking, that change of pathway would be kind of made ever more important to be really fluid about. And to me, magic is way more like that than just getting in the car and getting on the highway and going, okay, I'm going to drink a lot of monsters and I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I feel like that is a lot of people's approach is like I'm gonna power through, and I mean I know people should practice however the fuck works for them and whatever they're into, but like
Absolutely,
that's just
always.
not that's just not how it works for me in terms of like, all right, I've got this big plan, I'm gonna fucking do all this very complicated crazy shit and just fucking knock this wall down, and I don't know, I've tried it a few times. It's just not how it works for me. But fuck yeah, if it works for you all. But like, it's just, to me, it's like there's so many different ways to get to a place, right? Like you said, these changes of paths. Like, why constrict your thinking by like saying like I have to take this flight to New York at this time, and like you said, unless it's like some kind of an emergency, right? Like,
yep, and then you try it, and you see what happens, and you understand that still may not work, right? You think about right now, like right now is a really brilliant thing because there's a way that right now is a special moment in time, but there's a way that it isn't, right? It's a way that this is something that is always going on. But if you look at this, or you look at the financial collapse and, 10 years back, whatever that was, and you go, okay, all these people that had everything mapped out perfectly and did everything right? They had the right job. They created the right business. And then some funky banking took that down, or you have a pandemic and you're not allowed to have your business open for 9 months. Your planning didn't necessarily help you, right?
yeah.
And so that necessity of being really adaptable to what's happening is, I think, a big part of just life. It's not just magic. There's this fantasy that it's kind of, that more is in our control than it really is, and if we accept that that's a fantasy, you go, okay, well, yeah, sure, we're going to steer, but we're aware that we might, come upon that burning semi on the highway that makes me take a forest road around it.
Mm-hmm. I used to be a mechanic when I was younger, and we had this client who was a taxi driver, and he was an independent driver, and he loved his truck. He took excellent care of it, just immaculate. He had just like put all of this work into it. It was tip-top shape. He had done everything right, all of the planning, all of the maintenance. This thing would have lasted for quite a long time, but a couple of days later, it got totaled by somebody in an intersection, and it's
shit happens.
That shit just happens. So that's like, and I think, yeah, it's so funny. I think that we are sold a lot of this illusion of control too, like oh, buy this insurance and you'll be totally fine. You're totally protected. Like there's all these like weird messages that we're getting about like how everything's under control and everything's orderly and don't worry about it. And it's all such fucking bullshit.
Oh no, it's so funny. And there's so much funny stuff that goes on that it's, again, that I think depending on your perspective, yeah, I don't understand how you don't like look at that and go, okay, well, none of the major illnesses or injuries that I've had was I prepared for. There were, pretty much every relationship in my life has hit some point that I couldn't foresee, right? For good or for bad. Not saying these are all negative things. I never saw myself being able to make a living as a talismanic jeweler. And then certainly when I was doing it, I never saw a point where it would make sense to stop doing that, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to be really fluid just as people. And I think that that's our nature. That's why we're still here, right? Because we've got big brains, but we lack a lot of the other tools that other animals have that are still here. And so I think that fluidity is kind of a key. And so I think it's very weird to try and codify, here's how this all works in 10 degrees, and here's the 25 books you need to read for this one. And then at that point, having read those books and having done these practices, you'll be ready for the next one. Well, why is that the criteria? And then that's on one side of it. And then on the other side of it, which is, I think, was a good thing about all the information being out now, is why do you think you need that degree? Or why is it interesting? Not saying you do think you need it, but why should that be interesting? Why should you want to find a coven to practice witchcraft with? It's not saying that you shouldn't. It's just these things that were put out. There was a big sense that when I was coming in, that solitary practitioners in witchcraft were kind of not, it was not a desirable state, And it's a funny one because it's like the further I moved away from working with people, the more it made sense to me. and the more I was able to achieve success with what I was doing, because I was no longer having to kind of explain or bring anybody along with me. I wasn't beholden to somebody having a bad mood, bringing in energies to the work we were doing that I didn't like. And that's, again, it's not saying that this is the right way. It's just a way that works for me. And so I think if we question all of that stuff, that's a great aspect of the modern situation, is we really are able to go, yeah, I want to work with people and I can find them to work with. Or I don't ever want to work with anybody and I just want to study this stuff. It's all available now as options.
Oh, yeah. All right. Would you like to take a bibliomancy break?
Of course.
Okay. Hell yeah. Okay, so the way this works is I have the guest ask a question, and then I'll have you either flip a coin, or I can if you don't have one, and then roll a d12, or I can if you don't have one, and we'll figure out which book to use and receive the insight of Eris.
I probably have a coin in here. I know I don't have a die in here, but
okay.
I'm going to look, because if I have a coin, it'll be a cool one.
All right, hell yeah.
Let's see. They might all be out. I've been playing with them. I think I might have one. Ooh, I do. Okay, I have a coin.
All right. So go ahead and ask your question, please.
Out loud or to myself?
Well, I typically have it out loud. But if you really don't want to say it, we can do it that way too. That's okay.
Okay, let me come up with a question. How will my current travel plans play out for me in the coming 6 months?
All right. Go ahead and flip a coin, please.
It is heads.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and roll a d12 here. We've got number 4. And let's see here. It is going to be from the Book of Mormon.
Awesome.
I'll be right back here. Stand by while I grab it. All right.
I'm stoked that it's from the Book of Mormon, because that's it's like the Bible meets Conan if you have the illustrated editions. I think that's awesome.
Oh man, I don't have the illustrated edition.
Oh no, it's totally amazing. It's all very barbarian looking stuff. It looks good. It looks much different. I think that they'd be more successful in the outreach program if they looked more like they did in the illustrated edition I used to have.
You need to rebrand.
I need to rebrand. That was fairly hot.
Oh, Eris, how will Aidan's travel plans shake out in the next 6 months? All right. This is from the Book of Ether, or Ether. I'm not quite sure. This is 10:5. And it came to pass that Rip Lachish did not do that which was right in the sight of the Lord, for he did have many wives and concubines, and did lay upon men's shoulders, which was grievous to be borne. Yea, he did tax them with the heavy taxes, and with the taxes he did build many spacious buildings.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a fun time.
I think I'm totally down. That fits my intentions perfectly. So,
all right.
Thank you, Eris. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Eris.
Oh, so good. That is way better than I'd expected. I've read that book, so I know how it can go.
Well, she rarely disappoints. So I know you said you don't do a whole lot of, you don't use a whole lot of tools for divination, but I like to ask guests at this point, if they have any thoughts about divination or randomness or anything like that. Yeah,
I do the pendulum when I have questions most of the time, and I do read with Marseille trumps.
Oh, okay.
I don't use the small cards, and I do a little bit of playing card divination.
Okay, rad.
But I just generally don't find that I need to do a lot of divination, and so I don't. It's that's the main thing. It's a hard one for me to say anything about, because I really am not a heavy user. I know people who are fantastic and get a ton out of it, but it's not something that is, I mean, if I do divination more than 5 times a year, there's a hell of a lot of shit going on that is out of control. So yeah, it's difficult for me to say much about that unless we take kind of taking guidance from my allies as divination, which I think is a fairly reasonable view. So mechanical divination is not really my thing, but I do a lot of trance work, and I do bring a lot of questions into that space, and I get a lot of answers to that. So,
yeah, absolutely. That's sometimes how scrying works for me. Like just, getting yourself into that space where you can get the answers that are present already. And however people like to contextualize that, I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and so that I get a lot of that where it's like I'll kind of go in. Usually it's in the cold months that I have the most success, but I tend to wake up in the middle of the night fairly frequently, and so I just immediately get up, use the bathroom if that's what woke me up, and then lay back down and go into trance. And in those spaces, I get a lot of guidance about what I'm doing and kind of useful tools for where I'm at. Is often the case. I get most of the practices that I get in that space now. Most of them are now derived from there. And yeah, it's interesting. I've always wanted to be some kind of like, terrifying reader. I thought that would be a really fun thing. There's an aesthetic there that I think would be really cool. Really, just outrageous Igil saga kind of stuff or something, Norse saga kind of level divination, prophesying. But I know people that actually have that skill, and I'm glad that I don't. They don't seem to have a lot of fun with it.
It seems like it'd be fun at a party, but then after that...
There's a reason that there's that whole Cassandra story. It's like, yeah, it's awesome. You can see it all, as Tuxedo Man said, but no one believed her. So...
All right, so I really want to talk about dirt sorcery.
Right on.
This is dope. I'm really into it. Will you give the listeners just a kind of a short intro into what the hell that means?
Sure. So this is a story that I've told many times, but when I got into magic and actually started practicing rather than just occasionally doing stuff, I did that through folks that I met through the OTO, and ended up joining the OTO. And so I was working pretty much like I am now, though not as successfully. And there was all these people that were into Solomonic magic and Enochian magic and all of that. And there was a guy that was awesome that I really liked at that lodge that was doing Tesseract magic and all this stuff. And so just because you were there, and especially on Sundays when the Gnostic Mass was going on, and I was there pretty much every Sunday for that for years, people would start talking to me about shit that I just knew nothing about. And I would tell them, I don't understand what you're talking about because I don't understand Kabbalah or astrology or any of that stuff. I'm a rocks and string kind of guy, which was just a direct description of how I worked. And over time, I began using the term dirt sorcery for that, because that really has been how I've done most of my best work. Is you go outside and you go wander around and you ask for some allies and you find a stick. And you go, okay, that stick is one of those tools, one of those allies. And you keep walking and you go, oh, I found feathers. And you begin tying these things together and bundling them up and kind of talking to them as if they're sentient. And in my experience, if you do this, they begin to function as if they are sentient. And you can then do magic with them, if that process itself isn't enough to be considered magic. And so that's really the root of a lot of this stuff. And I like the fact that dirt sorcery is a really hard concept to take too seriously as well, because I really don't get why this shit has to be so fucking serious on a social level. I think it has the potential to be incredibly serious on a personal level, meaning that it's incredibly impactful, but not that it's, we need to have long rhetorical semantical arguments about shit that don't matter.
Yeah. Unless like you're into that, which is fine.
Yeah, totally. I'm just not that guy. I am not that guy. People go, well, that doesn't mean that. Whatever. Religion means religio. It's like, yeah, it means binding.
Well, it does.
Yeah, it means binding. I'm not into it. I totally get what it means. We're just interpreting that as not being a good thing or being a good thing. We have a different take.
I mean, it's all about the context. I don't know.
Exactly. There's forms of that I'm way into. But again, it's with the right person, not in general.
And we don't need to argue about it, everybody.
Just find that person that's right with and do that thing. It's good. You don't need to get crazy about it. And so the dirt sorcerer idea started there, and the fact that I do a lot of work with dirt. Though that's not anything I've written extensively about. I read about it a little bit in both books. But rather than necessarily trying to find kind of really arcane materia, and having been that I've always liked wandering around in kind of outdoorsy places, I began kind of using that idea of like, okay, can I find a power spot, right? If we go back to kind of a Castaneda idea that's in his early books, it's like, can I find a power spot that is amenable to the kind of work that I want? And then can I just collect things from that place as potent materia? And in my experience, it works fantastically. So there's just many layers to it. But yeah, and part of it is also then that thing that I always bring up, which is I don't view magic as trying to transcend the body. I view it as an aspect of the work that we do in the body. And so the body is kind of that idea of the body as being dirty, right? That exists in a lot of cultures.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that it's like, yeah, but again, is that a bad thing? Right?
Yeah.
We're made from dirt, as Chris Whitley tells us.
Just thinking about the dirt sorcery thing, the other thing that comes to mind too is like, even if a person prefers like a really sort of materialist, maybe psychological model outlook, you could still say that like this dirt has a unique biological profile, right? Like there's still like, it's special, like from that place, it's going to be unique. Like a forensic analysis could show you like exactly where it came from. And that's really, I mean, it not only is it like, it feels right, like it actually, you could like follow it down another science-y rabbit hole and kind of come to the same conclusion, which is really fucking cool.
Absolutely. And also there's an idea that I think is borrowable from, if we think about like, like planetary hours and stuff like that, mm-hmm. or astrological, what do they call it? Elections. I'm not an astrologer.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm not either, dude.
Where they say, okay, this moment has a particular imprint on it, right? Mm-hmm. Of the planet or of the kind of astrology of the moment. And we can create a talisman or do a piece of work at that moment and it will carry that imprint, right? And so if we kind of extract that back to the dirt concept too, and something that I talk about at the end of 6 Ways, I've had extremely good luck going out into the woods somewhere or going into a cemetery somewhere, going into a park somewhere where I had access to the dirt and sitting and spending a lot of time. And usually I'll dig like a little hole and kind of talk to it. And again, try and hit that space that we talked about earlier, that experiential space, and kind of think myself, talk myself, daydream myself, sing myself, however you want to do it, into the place that feels like the thing I'm trying to connect to, and then collect that dirt at that moment and know that it has that imprint from all of that work. And then, you spit in it or come in it and bleed in it and do all those things, and you have these really potent talismans that are kind of materially bound. And for me, most of the effects that I'm after are materially, even if we're viewing it as the mind as an extension of the material body, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so I do think that all of that stuff can come into play within that concept.
Well, and this idea of this like dichotomy between the mind and the body, like it's, I don't know, I think it's starting to dissolve. We talk about this on the show a lot, but like It reminds me a little bit too of like what I think is a sort of false dichotomy between what people say is like inner and outer work.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's not really a distinction that's important, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's very one of the things that my friend Fabiku is kind of a brilliant mind, and he's working on several books he's got a book of poetry coming out first, and then I think he's got two books that are more directed to magic. And one of the things that he and I kind of bonded over pretty early on when we met was the idea that the kind of transformative inner stuff that we've experienced came faster through doing kind of practical magic than it did from kind of actively going after it, right? Which I think is kind of a great support for what you just said. So in my experience, people ask for things, and for whatever reason their life isn't in alignment with that thing. They aren't the kind of person that thing would happen to. So either it doesn't happen, or they become the kind of person that thing would happen to.
Yeah.
Which is an incredible teacher, and not always in a fun way. But it sinks into that whole idea that that I harp on a lot, and when talking to people is like, if you're doing magic, you are asking to be changed into the kind of person that can have the things that you want. This is a much easier explanation than the entire universe is redirecting itself to somehow counter all of the ways that you aren't that kind of a person so that you can have it. The path of least resistance is only about your resistance, right? It's not necessarily anything more than that. And so it might seem like it would be easier to get that thing without having your life completely fall apart and be rebuilt into a different form. But that's not what the field is saying. And so I think that there's tons I think that they're way more integrated than people think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And my experience has lined up pretty closely with what you just said in terms of like, yeah, if you want shit to be different, it's going to be different, and it might not happen the way that you think it's going to happen, and be ready for it, and that's good. I don't know.
Right, and I think it's that thing about it's kind of one of the things that I love about that I picked up from the folks that I knew that did hoodoo was road opening work, right? And realizing, to me, it hit me pretty early on that road opening work and crossroads work and all that stuff is very much happening on both levels, right? It's like, yes, you're asking for the externals that are in your way, whether those are material or not, to be removed from your way. But the same thing is happening on the inside. And so you go, so if you have shit you need to process before you can get to that other place, if you keep asking to get to that other place, that shit will be worked out. Maybe not to your liking, but it will get there. Yeah, I'm not a big believer that we have as nearly as much control as a lot of the folks that I know that practice think we do. It's not my experience.
Well, I feel like we're part of a really fucking complex system, and getting that, you can have a lot of control over a certain scale of it, but then when you get to different scales, maybe not. I don't know.
No, absolutely. I think that's a huge thing, right? As you go, no, there's all sorts of things you do have control over. It's not to say you shouldn't try and influence those things, but I think that there's a way that people see, what I tend to talk about as being the weirdness, but people will say about backlash or things like that. And sometimes it's like, is the system trying to correct all of the parts of the system into a form where you can have that? And a lot of that isn't fun in the moment, right? But that is what you're asking for in general. It's the thing that I keep hammering on forever in this series with this book, I think, is saying, if you're asking for things to be different, you are asking for you to be different. Because otherwise you'd already have that thing.
Yeah, definitely. If you already knew how to get the thing, you wouldn't need to use
Exactly.
magic.
It's like if it was already, if that was the natural outcome for you where you are right now, you would be there. So there's changes that have to occur, and those are going to happen on all levels. And I think if you're aware of that, then it's way less freaky, right? It's way less upsetting. And so that's, it's one of the things that I put out there a lot just because of that. Because a lot of folks don't, it's not generally talked about a lot. Or it's talked about like it's, you did your magic bad. And it's like, no, you hated your life and now your wife left you and you got fired from your job. So your life is really different and now you can make it how you want it. How is that not what you asked for?
Yeah.
You know, did it take the exact form you were hoping for to get there? Maybe not.
How clear were you in your intentions anyway? I mean, yeah, I'll love it. Yeah.
You know, so it's fascinating. It's like, yeah, accept that. It's like, you know, if you want to, I don't know, if you want to learn how to run 30 miles, there's going to be a lot of suck in between here and there if you can't run one right now.
Totally.
And you're going to be a really different person, both internally and physically, psychologically, by the time you get to the 30 miles. You're not going to be the same person. And that's the other part of that whole thing, right? It's like, you go, we aren't the same people we were when we went to bed or when we started this conversation. The system is always in flux. And we have this kind of weird, the materialist view has got this weird view that we think all these things are static, that to me are clearly not, that they're incredibly fluid.
Yeah, no, definitely. Or even thinking about, I don't know, the body as like a thing. It's really more of like a bunch of things all put together, right? You think about yourself as maybe like an individual, or some people think about themselves as individuals all together. I don't know, whatever. But it's even more than that. Like it's way more complicated. You're a whole system of little organisms and everything.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm totally with you. I mean, it's like, I remember when I first learned about like mitochondria. You went like, oh, okay. So what I am this host vehicle for my mitochondria. Right? And so we might have to come to some agreements.
Yeah.
About how I want things to go. You know, or I have to accept that there are things that if I eat them, they make me sick. It doesn't matter whether I like them. And why would this not be true with all sorts of things other than just food?
Oh, definitely. So like we have these spheres where we have a lot of choice and these other spheres where we don't, right? Like I'm just wondering, like, okay, so, and this is kind of in the vein of like weaving fate. Like I'm guessing that if a lot of people started to take a little bit more of an interest in the sphere of control in which they actually might be able to make an impact, which is their sort of their life and their surroundings, I'm wondering to what extent that might have a positive cumulative effect that moving forward could be quite beneficial. I know that you've probably commented on this before, but I would love to hear your thoughts about it.
I mean, that's the subtext of the book, really.
Yeah.
It's not written in there because it's like, there's things that end up written in the books that I then take out because I think that they're more functional if people come to them when they come to them, right? And it's like, I don't need to be hand-holding everything, you know. But yeah, I think that we're in this really weird place where we have a lot of bad narrative and a lot of bad storage, meaning bad in a judgmental way, meaning that it's non-beneficial to the vast majority of the people on the planet, right?
Mm-hmm. It's shitty.
It's shitty systems that are in place that benefit only very specific people. And I think that the way that you start out of that is not just by going, "That's a shitty system, let's burn it down."
Yes.
You go, okay,
that's not productive, guys.
Well, historically what happens is you replace it with a very similar shitty system.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so maybe the primary function for a while should be we want to stop the degradation of things now because that's something that we can do, but we really have to be focusing on what would the better system look like? What would a healthier system look like? What would one that wasn't as demeaning and degrading to both humans and the other folks we live on this place with? And what does that really look like? And can we, kind of coming from the weaving fate thing, the more we are imagining those scenarios really hard with ourselves living in them, seeing, feeling, tasting ourselves living in them, I think that the greater opportunity there is for this to come about. Because I am like, I've been dreaming Mad Max since I saw The Road Warrior when I was a fucking kid. And I really don't want to see that. And it seems like that is where we're kind of heading, and the narrative of that is ever more present.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to begin kind of really churning a very, very different series of narratives. And they don't need to be the same narrative, It's not that you and I have to share one, but the more of us that are able to really take some time and throw out, this would be a better way. And not in the sense of let's try and force it necessarily. Nothing against that either. Everybody gets to do their own thing. But to really, really, really sense into that, because I think that that's the function of kind of cultural mythology, is to build those cultures.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, that's sort of one of the things that I was thinking about. Like I've been, I don't know if you've heard about this green mushroom thing. This is one of the things, I don't know if I'm gonna fucking put this in the interview, but I did want to ask you about it because I would super value your opinion. But it seems to me like so much has happened this year, which has caused people to be like really isolated and like fucking like pushed back into the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like we're just sort of like in retreat. And so I figured like in order to get to a place where like you could even feel like, yeah, I could fucking think about maybe doing shit differently or whatever, like maybe like a little bit of a support structure. So that's sort of like what I was thinking about with this like Hypersigil is like this, little underground network of green magic that people could like draw from to like get a little boost and sort of propelling themselves forward to this type of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have not seen much on this, but I think it's absolutely a viable and kind of needed approach. And again, it does sink into that question that you had earlier about 6 ways in weaving fate, in a sense that this is the allies' push behind these books, because they're heavily involved in the writing of them. Is they're like, this viewpoint that I have at one point, some of them began being really clear, that this viewpoint that you have would produce, if it were more widespread, a more beneficial situation for us. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's all about all that stuff. I think that, yeah, you have to be able to see, I think we have to be able to see a better tomorrow rather than just burn it down. And that's not to say that there's not a whole lot that shouldn't be burnt down, because there is, in my mind.
Yeah, I'm cool with burning it down as long as we know what we're going to build in its place, right?
Yeah, and stop wigging out about the shit that doesn't matter as hard, because there's a lot of divide and conquer in place right now.
Absolutely.
And I'm not just saying that on a political sense. It's everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And when you have when we know that kind of the kind of culturally powerful, right? So not talking Instagram influencers here, but the folks that are actually throwing billions of dollars at controlling narrative, they have a very clear picture of what they want. And so there is a lot to counter there. And so it's understanding that, and then again, understanding that like that, look at the founding, look at the narratives that we're attached to, looking at, is there any basis in them, right? I've been talking for something that's kind of come up in the last little bit, meaning like 20 years, I'd say. This thing that I've thought forever, which is like, if you look at like the founding documents of the United States and you go, what the fuck were these guys even talking about when we know what we know about them? Mm-hmm. Like, they are not talking about what you think they're talking about when you're told about it in school, right?
No, absolutely.
No. All men are created equal does not mean to you what it meant to these people.
They're like, all people that are just like me are equal because they're like me.
Exactly. And yeah, the women folk, not so much. The Aboriginal folks on whatever land we are, not so much.
Women, who are they? Aboriginal people, who are they? Who cares?
Exactly.
I don't know.
You know, and so it's a really interesting thing, because I think that part of what we're seeing right now is this, like, it's funny. It's like, I think that there's like a collapse of narrative, and it's not pretty. And there's people who really, really, really are entrenched in not letting go of that narrative. So yeah, I think there's, I mean, I don't think that there's a bad method to use here. I think that it's every method should be used. And understanding that there's both like the incremental, straightforward steps you can take, but then there's also this magical stuff, which to me is hugely important, because I think that we can see how, if we look at the way that there's this conversation that comes up, and it popped up maybe last year or the year before really hard, about kind of let's call it cultural appropriation of witchcraft by capitalist sources. And is this a good thing or a bad thing, right? So this is, should, whatever, the Gap be selling tarot decks? It doesn't really matter which subset of this is, or how widespread has witchcraft become a marketable commodity by large companies versus, mom and pops, and small presses or small makers and things like that. There's a really interesting thing there that I don't see a lot, which is, what does it mean that these practices have actually begun to bleed over to that? Like, there's a way that the narrative is now bleeding across to places where it never has before. And whether or not this is individual case, the Gap selling tarot cards or whatever it was, who was selling what, is not really the issue. But it's clear that these things, even if it's just the aesthetics of power, right, which we can think of that as being something where the aesthetics of a particular kind of power have moved in, that tells me that you can move some of this stuff in there. And it's not, I mean, yeah, it's kind of, you have a chaos magic background, I know, so it's like, can we kind of insert better viruses into the system?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Is what I would say. Can you, it's not, the system is not necessarily antidotable, but I think you can steer it, just like we can steer our own magic. And I think that that's a place for a lot of very aggressive work to be done on a wide scale, in my mind.
Absolutely. Like, the system, in quotes, is just like any other system. And the way that systems work here, as far as I understand it at least, is, they're mostly complex. They're mostly, nonlinear, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, they're super changeable and they're super adaptive, even with like little things. But it's pretty hard to, say how that's going to go. And there's a lot of tie-in too with like looking at things, and you can use biology as a really good model for how a lot of this shit works too. So I like the analogy of viruses. I think that's really solid.
Well, it's also interesting because if we look at just thought process viruses, right? And so we could look at this as all forms of culture. This is another one of those things that gets me in trouble with some people, because they really think that this is just a wrong way to view this.
Well, they should yell at Dawkins then.
They should, and I'm not really viewing even it from that sense, but most forms of culture are forms of cultural indoctrination. This is not saying it's a bad thing.
Well, how do you have the culture without the people participating in the culture?
Exactly. But if we accept that as true, then you go, okay, so what do we have to do? We have to produce it's not a subculture. We have to actually produce a culture. And I think that's the interesting game. And if we do understand that these are incredibly complex linear systems, it's not going to all be one thing. Mm-hmm. It's not all going to be Green Party veganism. It's going to be that and that approach really sucks for the system that we have in place, right? If we look at what goes on in the, computer phone operating system world and all of that stuff, and things like that, it's very clear that what is desired is monopoly, right? What is desired is monoculture. And maybe dueling monoculture, because then that gives you a choice, right? You get to pick your Apple or your Android monoculture.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more kind of variance we can throw out there is awesome.
And I think the system demands that happens anyway, because like when you have too much monoculture and shit, like it becomes very unstable. And in that vacuum is the perfect opportunity to inject whatever. So yeah.
And I think that this is a great time, and it's really an interesting one, because you go, yeah, this is a shitty time in a lot of ways, but it's also a great time because of that. Like, there are structures that have begun to break down, right? And the really adaptive kind of superorganisms, right? So let's look at like Google and Apple and all that kind of stuff right now.
Yeah.
Have adapted beautifully to it, right? The pandemic has been fantastic for them and for Amazon and all that stuff. To me, it's like a really interesting time for people to go, okay, yes, we all have to kind of, those of us that have been hammered, and I haven't nearly as much as many people I know, but we should have been taking the last 9 months to go, how do I become more functional within this kind of change, right? Mm-hmm. What can I gain from this? Can I generate a situation that works better for me both now and later? Because that idea of things, systems don't really return to baseline, right? They return to a different baseline. Things don't go back to how they were in general in these kind of complex systems. So you go, it's not going to go back to what it was. So are you actually thinking about that now and working at that now and understanding that, like everything else, it doesn't mean you're going to get it right the first time. But it's exposed a vast amount of flaws in the kind of stability of the system as it affects us on an individual and on a global level. And so it's a really beautiful moment in a sense to go, okay, well, what would we do different? If we knew this could happen again, and it has happened, so we know it could happen again, how would we do life different? And again, I have answers for me, but I don't have answers for anybody else.
And I mean, I think that these are obviously, yeah, now this is important, but like to always sort of be asking yourself that question too is like, right? Because it's, I think you said something earlier on about how, it's the world, we're always at these moments, right? I mean, it definitely right now it's very, very clear, but in some ways, like the world is always ending or always at the unprecedented historical times, like you read back in history and the authors will be like, now we know and we have it all figured out. And it's like just this idea that like, it's not, you're not going to be going back to the way things are. That's in some ways a sort of childish idea that we sort of cling to.
Yeah, totally.
Like it's, I don't know, every fucking day is a gate that you step through that you can't really walk back the other way. So I don't know.
No, and I think that's a really important thing, and I think it's something that to me is a given in magical practice, but apparently it isn't, right? But that thought of like, one of the things that I bring up in Weaving Fate that has been something my wife and I have talked about for years is everywhere that you hit that I could never be that kind of a person. I could never do that thing. I could never. All of the different layers of that, those are like these brilliant, you're like looking at a gate. And you are deciding that it's locked every time you say that. And so that's a really beautiful point. And if we were to take, my favorite language from Joe Biden of late is, we've reached an inflection point. It's like we are always reaching an inflection point, dude. The gate is always there, and we are always deciding whether it's locked or it's unlocked, and whether we want to unlock it or lock it, whether we want to ignore it or whether we want to walk through it. Mm-hmm. This is happening all the time. And, I remember talking to someone, I don't remember, it was one of the times when I moved somewhere I'd never been without doing any recon, with no money essentially. And they were like, well, how do you do this? It's like, you just get on the plane. It's like, it's like, I've been on my bike forever, so I know, in mostly being a city boy up until the last 10 years, like I could die or be maimed in any day, multiple times, right? So why is getting on a plane with, a backpack and a suitcase full of books any riskier than getting on my bike or walking out my door or deciding to go to work that day. We have this capacity for radical change, but there's so much. And if we were to look at, this is the thing that I think is interesting, if we look about kind of the way that corporatism is right now, is it's like, how much distraction can we feed into the system so people don't walk through those doors?
Absolutely.
And you go, okay, so which piece is that? Which piece of that am I going to buy into, and for how long? And, is it enough that, am I going to do Netflix for the first month of this, or am I going to do Netflix for the rest of my life? Or am I going to see if there's something else that's more interesting or could be more fun or terrifies me? Mm-hmm. What terrifies me? That's a really interesting question, What are the things that you could do but you won't because you're terrified? That's a good question for a magical person to ask.
Yeah, fuck, if you want to do some ego magic real fast, fucking figure out what you're super scared of and fucking do it.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's that thing that's so funny about kind of inner work or practical magic not being all that different, really, right? As you go, okay, well, yeah, I could get on my bike and ride through South America to South America today. Okay, there's a lot of reasons I'm not doing that. Which of those are valid to me? And do I want to do that thing more than any of those things matter,
Yeah.
There's Chris Whitley, who's one of my favorite musicians, mostly blues guy, but very strange. He released a record that was recorded before he knew he was going to die, as far as I've been able to tell. But it seems like it was written after he knew he was going to die. And one of the things that's really brilliant is there's a piece on that record where the only words in English of the whole thing is he just repeats, "You could just walk away." And to me, that's like one of these things that I've kind of used as a mantra ever since. Is like, if I find myself in a situation that isn't working for me, that's what I try to pull up. Like, you could just walk away from this. You don't have to be doing this thing. This doesn't mean that there's no consequences, right? Which is what people want. Is they want I could walk away from everything that I know, or I could walk out of my job, or out of my relationship, or out of this house, or go somewhere else, do something else. But we want the assurance that somehow everything's going to go smoothly and be fine, and we're going to like it better than what we have right now. And those things are not available. So if they're not available, you still could do it. And I think that, to me, that's so much a core of magic, is you go, sure, I'm going to do these spells or these workings to change shit. And I don't get to know that it works out in my favor, right? Mm-hmm. That's incredibly powerful to me. It's a benefit, right? It's as Gordon White would say, it's a feature, not a bug. People ask in the 6 Ways group I have on Facebook, somebody asked the other day about, there's a practice on my blog. If you do a search on my blog for "there are doors," it'll show up, that I've used a few times, where you basically convince yourself that a space out in nature, a gap that you find somewhere out in nature, is a portal to another world, another version of the world. And you do a lot of work to really solidly convince yourself that this is true. And then you have to, at some point, decide whether you walk through it or not. And I've done this several times. And people are always like, well, can you pick where you go? I'm like, that's kind of defeating the whole purpose. The whole thing is, it's like, do you want different, right? And it's not saying that you should walk through, but it should open you to how much you do or do not want different. And, the work that's in Weaving Fate is a much more controlled version of that working, really. But to me, there has been huge upsides and downsides every time I've done that, whether in that ritual space or just because I've gotten on a plane or realized I'm unhappy somewhere and said, I don't care that I have something better. I'm just done. And we'll see what happens. And yeah, there's this weird illusion of control that wants you to say, I want everything nailed down first. And you go, well, even if you do all that, it doesn't mean that's what you get. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, when I read that Doors chapter in Weaving Fate, I was like, it's dope. It definitely reminded me a lot of Castaneda too, which I love. I used to do this thing when I was in college, and I had like a test that I was nervous for. And like when I was on the way to the test, I would walk through the doorway to the classroom, but like as I did, I would make it a doorway to a reality that I had done well in the test. Like,
Totally.
So that's like, I guess that's like a different, like, yeah, I was trying to like choose where I was going, but it wasn't like I was like, oh, I'm magically, like, no, I still had to fucking take the test and study for it and shit. Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, it's one of the things that I have to, and it's not like all this stuff comes easy to me, or that I'm always doing this shit, because I'm not, but in this way. But one of the things that I've always had to do once I kind of, once I freight hopped and hitchhiked from San Francisco to Toronto one summer, and it was really hellish, more often than it was awesome. But the end result of it was awesome. That was the thing that was so good about it, it wasn't that the experience was awesome. It's that I realized, like, oh, by doing that, I became the kind of person who could do that.
Yeah.
And I think we want it to work the other way, right? We want to go, or we say, I wish I was the kind of person who could do that. It's like, well, no one is until they do it. It's that simple. It's that fucked up. It is that, it's or the people I know people who've been making, up until the pandemic, of course, probably, but who've been making a living busking for 30 years. And they didn't know they were the kind of person who could do that until they were deep in. And I'm sure that they've all got endless shitty stories about it too. So it's not like it's free of that. But I think we really I think that I would like to see, like, just like more of a, and it's probably what all of my work is and all these podcasts that I do is magically is I want more people just saying, like, if this shit calls to you, fucking go for it. Screw all the people that tell you you don't know enough, that what you're trying for isn't wise, that who do you think you are? Your own voice saying, I could never. Like, if you're drawn to this stuff, fucking go for it. There is no, you are the arbiter of whether it was worth it, or whether it is worth it, or whether whatever prices you end up paying are worth it. But you do not get to know beforehand. That's not one of the options on the table.
And how fucking boring would it be if it were, right? I don't know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I look at my life has been such a mess so many times. And there's no place where I would go, I wish I had really done that totally differently. There's little pieces where maybe I said something to somebody that was shitty, or did something that I think was shitty to somebody, that I would have liked to have had the option to not be that shitty. But as far as everything else, it's like, no, okay. So that I made this decision, and it led to a really hard 2 years. What the fuck do you expect as a fucking animal on this planet, right?
Yeah, no, and there's, again, and all this, like, illusory shit telling us, like, oh, well, if you're not happy, if you don't have a certain type of life that looks a certain way, and a certain type of family that looks a certain, like, you're not doing it right, and you're a failure, basically. And it's just bullshit. Like, it really is just meant to control people's actions and keep them in their little,
absolutely,
their little lanes and stuff. And I don't know. So yeah, it's cool. If shit's fucked up, that's okay. Like,
and it's, again, we're, animals wandering through a material world. You break shit, you eat something that's poison. You get shot, you get beat. These things can always happen. There's no actual way to not have any of those things happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so don't buy into the story that you need to have a certain amount of control before you can move in a direction that makes sense to you. This is also not saying that if you know that you are risk averse, to set it up in a way that makes sense, but also begin playing and see, is that really you, or is that your mama or your papa or your grandma or your teacher or your culture?
Yeah, or something shitty that happened to you once that you haven't dealt with, or
right? Because if those things aren't what I talk about in Weaving Fate as being like intrinsic parts of you, they don't need to be given a seat at the table. And so, it's do what seems good to you. And if you can figure out that you go, oh, okay, I am terrified of that gate, that door, of that change. what is that? Because is it something you even have control over either way? You know, I have trans friends that have, you know, gone through this with their families, you know, and I'm constantly blown away by kind of their toughness and their bravery and their unwillingness to maintain, to keep other people happy at like really grievous personal expense, you know? And I look at that and many other things that are similar to that as huge kind of guideposts that I go, fuck, okay, I'm scared of being alone. Thus, I'm not going to leave the situation that sucks.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person. So the way I don't have to be that person is to walk out the door.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude.
Right? And it's not saying that, you know, I'm using kind of specific examples, but because I think that they're relatable. But, you know, no, I've spent years in relationships that I should not have been in because I was miserable. And I've spent years in jobs that I shouldn't have been in because I was miserable. But I didn't know enough at that time to give myself the permission to go, oh, okay, yeah, this is going to hurt this person. Or I might end up living on my brother's couch for a while. Or I might have to, you know, get a harmonica and see if I can play it on the streets and get somebody to take pity on me and give me some food. But I'm not staying here.
Yeah, start telling myself a different story about who I fucking am to like make this change. Yeah, definitely.
Right. And I think that there's, you know, and the other thing is, and I just talked about this a little bit with Lena at the Mask in the Mirror podcast, but I've become a huge fan of this Dr. Andrew Huberman, who's a researcher at Stanford, is looking at kind of neurobiology and all that stuff. And I really suggest for people that are messed up by some of this stuff to listen to his, he does a long podcast on the Rich Roll podcast. And like, listen to that and really go like, yes, he's telling you that what you're experiencing is your brain chemistry. You know, the thing that tells you you can't is ways that your chemistry has been programmed and it can be changed. And again, I think that there's a huge overlap between magic and that kind of level of neuroplasticity studies and all these things.
Yeah, no, fuck yeah. Like telling, like even like neurolinguistic programming, like telling yourself different fucking stories. Like,
absolutely. And again, realizing that this is not anything new, right? Like if we look at stories of everything from, if we look at tribal stories, and I'm taking everything from like founding stories of Rome onward to motorcycle gangs, right? They function the way they function because of the narrative that underlies them, right? This is why, again, tie it into kind of the weird political scene that's been going on in the US and the crazy inequality that goes on here and the way that we export all of this kind of bad behavior all over the world ties into that. And it's what the stress that people are feeling is, I think, narrative stress. Like, no, but we're the good guys. It's like, well, you really haven't been paying attention.
yeah, who told you that?
You know, and it's hard.
Wait, who's been telling you that story?
I know that it's really prevalent, right? There is a massive industry telling you that story. But you should really look at it and see if you think it's true before you fucking lose your shit. And instead go, oh, okay, could we be that thing? Because that would be cool, right? You know, if we could, as a country, become something that actually reflects that kind of fantasy that's been sold and packaged for hundreds of years, that could be really cool. But that's hard to do. It's not saying that it can't be done, but we can do that version for ourselves. It's kind of the way that I think about it right now has been, what's the mythology that drives you as an individual or me as an individual? And does that need adjusting? Because we can do that. That's what, you know, magic is full of tools for that. And it's can we radically change that? If we believe we're powerless, then we probably are. Unfortunately, the other side doesn't go quite as easy. But if we decide that we actually do have agency, we do have some sovereignty, and that can't be taken away, and that the reason we as a people are afraid of so many things are mostly that those were imprinted on us as tools of control. Do you want that? Is it helping you? It wasn't necessarily done with intentional malice, right? Some of it was, but and so I think that this is it's all interlinked to everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah, well said, dude. Well, shit. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to just leave it there because that was good. Is there anything that you want to talk about that I didn't ask? I'm obviously going to talk about the podcast and the books and stuff and the intro and everything that I'll record later. But is there anything that you want to talk about or anything? Or?
I think I'm good. I mean, I'm always good and I'm always around, so I don't feel like we have to. I think that this one has its own vibe, and I think that's totally fine.
Okay, hell yeah. Well, it sounds to me like you're saying that you might be willing to come back and talk to me again.
Absolutely.
All right, hell yeah. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure.
All right, fuck yeah. All right, thanks again so much to Aidan. Definitely check out his book, 6 Ways and Weaving Fate. Also, definitely check out the 6 Ways podcast. It's really good. Like his books, it's straightforward info and no bullshit. You should also definitely check out his jewelry, his talismanic jewelry. It's super cool. I really like the shit that he does with sigils. All of it's very cool. Anyway, so this kind of thing that we were talking about, this distinction between like inner and outer work, the idea of being like changed by things that you practice or do. It's like kind of the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, I'm pretty sure. You could do the thing no matter how you feel about it, and this eventually changes the way that you feel about it. That interview with Dr. Andrew Huberman that Aidan mentioned is really good. I highly recommend checking it out. It goes into a lot of very helpful things about cognitive science and things like that. So, okay, the idea though is by doing the thing, we become the kind of person who does the thing. As we talked about a little bit before on this show, and as Aidan discusses in 6 Ways, ritual can be a really good step in that direction. But the thing is, you have to do the thing. And I'm talking about sort of, I guess what you could contextualize as like, I don't know, maybe ego magic or whatever. I'm talking about the personal example for my life is making this show. And also, putting some of like my like whatever weird artwork bullshit out on the internet, which I haven't done before. But yeah, like my mimetic disease project and stuff like that on Instagram is another example of this. I'd sort of been like off of my own, doing my own thing for a long time, like getting really into my practice and just fucking like thinking about a bunch of weird crazy shit, and that's good up to a point, but I started to get this like annoying feeling like I just wasn't doing the actual thing. Anyway, this show is part of that for me, but to make it, I'm needing to confront some issues related to like social anxiety, which is the process of becoming the kind of person who like does the thing, right? I'm certainly not saying that I'm some like fucking hero or whatever for doing this. Obviously, there's much, much harder things people are confronting than the very common experience of like a little anxiety about social situations and shit, whatever. I'm just trying to like sort of like own it and explain it as an example. I also am not saying that it's like easy or whatever either, but like for me, it's been super fucking worth it. And I'm also not special in this or most likely any other way. So you can definitely do something like this if you choose to too. And just having the chance to like talk to somebody like Aidan and my other guests too, and some of the people I'm working with, like just people whose work that I connect with and admire, it's been really amazing. Aidan and I ended up chatting a little bit after the interview. He's super cool. We talked about the green mushroom and a bunch of other shit. I wish I would have recorded the conversation, but lesson learned. I also forgot to ask Aidan what kind of coin he used for the Bibliomancy break. I'll have to get back to you on that. But so this thing that he was talking about, going out and finding the tools that you need to do the thing that you want to do, like, whatever you find, if you go out with the intention of like finding what you need, you'll find what you need most likely, right? And you can use these things and fashion them together. And so I've been kind of wanting to fashion an implement for the green mushroom project. And so I went out and I conducted this kind of exercise, right? And so I was walking by this little pond and I found this like really straight stick of magnolia wood, and I could tell that like this was the thing, right? And there was like other ones around it that kind of looked like it, but there was a certain one that was very clear that that was the one. And I wasn't quite sure why, who cares, but like, so I grabbed it and I ended up taking it back, and I was, doing my normal cleansing kind of thing that I do when I have these types of new things. And it wasn't until afterwards, and I had set it aside to dry, when I realized that the stick had these like tiny, tiny, tiny little mushrooms growing out of it. And I just thought that was so fucking dope. It was so perfect. So there's a fun example of that. I've been really enjoying like, hearing from everybody like who's been working with the green mushroom sigil. If you're curious about getting involved in this project, there's going to be some links and stuff in the episode description. You can also check out the Faith Blind Council podcast Discord server, where we are organizing and where I like to hang out. It's a really cool community of very smart, interesting people. Shout out to all of you guys. It's pretty fucking dope. So yeah, check that out. It's fun stuff. I think I saw that Aidan joined it, so that's cool. I'm not sure how much he's going to be on there or not, but that's pretty dope. So hell yeah, super exciting. I want to remind everybody to go ahead and definitely read Six Ways and Weaving Fate, and to listen to the Six Ways podcast. It's kind of funny. So I gave a copy of Six Ways to my friend Elise. You can hear her on the episode that I did of the show about egg and ego magic. She's really, really liking the book, but she made this comment to me the other day that like got me thinking. She was telling me about like how she like has these like sort of revelations or whatever, like these arcane like, insights that, strike her. And then she feels embarrassed when she finds out that other people have sort of like thought of them before. And I feel like maybe this has happened to like all of us, right? Where you're like, you read something in a book and you're like, I fucking knew it or whatever. Like, I think it's actually pretty cool. Like, while you might feel like you're late to the party, it's almost better to show up there on your own, fashionably late maybe. You didn't need an invite in the form of reading a book or whatever. You showed up there because you belonged there. Okay, I want to thank Douglas Batchelor from the What Magic Is This podcast for introducing me to Aidan's work. And lots of other cool shit too, actually. The Hygromantia, for example. So much fun. I love it. Doug is a really cool guy and very knowledgeable magician. Definitely check out his show, What Magic Is This? The episode with Aidan is really good, so definitely listen to that. And thank you so much for listening to the Lux Occult podcast. If you like my show, please do all this stuff, rate, subscribe, whatever, review, that stuff. I don't know. It's definitely a lot of work to make this shit, but you can thank me by doing some magic, and if you feel like it, you can tell me about that. I love hearing from all of you, so please keep sending me cool stories about what you're up to. I'm releasing this episode on Friday, which is the day that the Green Mushroom Council has designated for focused work with the sigil, Fungal Friday. Thank you to everyone helping and participating in this project. Also, thanks again to Dave from Unearthing Paranormalcy podcast for doing the voice work for the little green mushroom guided meditation we're putting together. The people from Faith Blind Council podcast and I are going to be doing a little intro for that. And that should be coming out exactly when the stars align, which hopefully will be soon. We'll see. If you're new to the green mushroom or maybe new to magic and you would like to connect to the web, I think that a really good way to get into it could be to do some art or a creative project that incorporates the green mushroom sigil. The color green and doing creative projects are both actually pretty like therapeutic in their own right, so you really can't go wrong there anyway. You could light a candle, some incense while you're doing this if you want to. I don't know, whatever you're into. Maybe try out a new art medium, get weird with it, I don't know. Definitely post about your creations with the green mushroom hashtag if you feel like it. And as always, please don't hesitate to send your thoughts, questions, suggestions, arcane revelations, or anything else to luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or message me on Instagram at luxoccultpod or at the mimetic disease. And that account is my weird ongoing art sigil and etc. project. There's a lot going on. Anyway, so here is some nonsense that I made for you. This comes from a set of 3 tarot readings that I did using 3 cards each. People who are into the Thoth deck might hear some fun buzzwords. Their readings were as follows: King of Wands, 6 of Wands, Queen of Wands. 6 of Wands, 7 of Swords, 6 of Cups. Princess of Cups, High Priestess, 3 of Cups.